So today what we're going to talk about are these three items: what's the urgency around growth, what are best assessment practices, and how do I keep it growing? So this definition of math literacy is from OECD, and OECD also conducts the Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, which evaluated the performance of 15-year-olds in math, science, and reading. So math literacy means having the ability to problem solve, reason, analyze information. It's the second key step for all students beyond language literacy. It's the ability to use numbers to help solve real-world problems. It's also the ability to understand the language of math. For example, that the sum means an answer to addition and difference means the answer to a subtraction question. Math literacy helps students to decipher what a question is actually asking by understanding the terminology. So to teach math literacy, we really need to look at 3 R's: relevant mathematical concepts, real-life context, and rich mathematical tasks. So Sue Gendron, the former Maine Commissioner of Education, believes that mathematics will most likely require the biggest shift in terms of teaching methods. Gendron is now the policy coordinator of one of the 2 groups that are developing assessments tailored specifically to the standards. Her group is SBAC. So students should be able to apply mathematical skills in familiar and unfamiliar situations, learn how to select and combine various skills for the purpose of solving problems, work in collaborative groups to solve problems and talk about math, write about mathematics and the problem-solving process, use mathematical ideas and ways of thinking to communicate about the world, and reflect on their own learning process. They need to use technology to support problem-solving in math, and they need to utilize their skills appropriately and effectively in combination with research. Students from the United States posted mostly average scores on the 2012 Program for International Student Assessment. This was a study comparing math, reading, and science proficiency of 15-year-olds from 65 countries and economies. Here is how U.S. students compared to a selection of the top performers on the test. This table shows that in 2012, the average score of 15-year-old Shanghai students on the PISA mathematics literacy scale was 613. In the U.S., the average score was 481. On the PISA reading literacy assessment, the average score of a 15-year-old Shanghai student was 570. In the U.S., it was 498. On the PISA science literacy assessment, the average score of 15-year-old Shanghai students was 580. In the U.S., it was 497. So here is where you'll see the U.S. scoring on this test. You can also look at the NAEP scores as we look at the difference in the achievement gap between white and black students and white and Hispanic students. The black, white, Hispanic score gaps in math and reading did not change significantly from 2011 to 2013, but there was some narrowing of racial and ethnic score gaps compared to the first assessment year. The white-black score gaps in math and reading narrowed from the early 90s to 2013 in grade 4. And the white-Hispanic gap in reading narrowed in comparison to 1992 at grade 8. So the same trends are seen here between white and black students in 8th grade, and the achievement gap is narrowing, but it's still too wide. And white and Hispanic students, same thing. So there's, with the new Common Core, there are shifts in math, and there are 6 specifically: focus, coherence, fluency, deep understanding, application, and dual intensity. And what the Common Core promised was to have standards that were fewer, higher, and clearer. So the first shift, focus. Teachers use the power of the eraser and significantly narrow and deepen the scope of how time and energy is spent in the math classroom. They do that in order to focus deeply on only the concepts that are prioritized. And this is an important part to understand, that even though we're looking at new standards, and they are fewer and higher and clearer, there's still too many. So everything cannot be a priority. So we need to prioritize what's important, what is the most important. We still can get to the other things, and we must, but we need to know what is the most important learning for students at each grade level. The next is coherence. So in coherence, principals and teachers connect the learning within and across grades, because it's important for kids to be able to build understandings and that are connected to the foundations, connected to previous years. We'll look at that in a few slides from now. The next shift is fluency. In fluency, students are expected to have speed and accuracy with simple calculations. So what we don't want to do is just provide drill and kill workshops that worksheets that kind of turn math into a chore, but we want them to understand the concepts that support the math. Deep understanding. Teachers have to teach more than how to get the answer, and they need to be able to assess the student's ability to understand the math that supports all of those algorithms. Shift 5 is application. So the students need to be able to use the math that they've learned and choose the appropriate concept when they find a problem. And the final shift is dual intensity. So in this shift, principals and teachers connect the learning within and across grades so that students can build new understanding into foundations built in the previous years. So when we look at rigor, what we want to understand is rigor is about the conceptual understanding. It's about the procedural skill and fluency. It doesn't mean more. A lot of times teachers are looking at, well, I'll just give them 3 pages of homework instead of 1. That's not rigor. That's just more. In this video, you will see the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset. It's important to understand that when we're looking at growth in a growth model, kids come to us with ideas and attitudes about their ability. In a growth mindset, we need to help kids understand that IQ and ability can change over time. It can get better. And if kids learn and if teachers learn, and when the whole system is built around the concept that we will get better over time, then that's exactly what happens. So how do we ensure that this growth happens over time? The answer to that question is data teams. And today, I'm going to show you a process of how to use data teams to make sure that we're continually growing with our teaching and learning around math. So before data teams, the first thing we need to do is choose priority standards. Once again, this goes back to the shift, focus shift number 1. There's a reason that we have to choose the priority standards, because as I said before, we can't get to everything. And not everything has the same level of urgency. So we use a protocol for choosing priority standards, and we start by looking at all of the standards. And as we read through them, we're going to go through them 3 times. And the first time we go through them, we will look for what standards are important for students to know in order for them to be successful in life. This is an endurance standard. If a standard is, this is in other words, if a child doesn't get this, they won't be a successful member of society. Next to all those standards, you want to put an L. for life. Then we're going to start going through the standards again. And this time we'll say, what is important for students to know in order for them to be successful in the test? And this is a leverage standard. So we're not going to argue about whether or not the tests should happen or whether we test too much. Not about that. We know that certain things are always going to be there, and tests are one of them. So which are standards that will help them be successful? Sometimes you see in tests the same kinds of patterns, kids not getting measurement or kids not understanding algebra. Those are the things you want to think about as you go through the second time. And then we'll go through the third time. And at this third time, we're looking at what is important for students to know in order for them to be successful in school. Because these standards provide readiness for the next level of learning. And this goes right back to the shifts in math. If they don't get this in second grade, they will be unsuccessful in third grade. So it's a school standard. So now we're going to put an S next to all those standards. When we've finished going through the standards 3 times, some standards are going to have an L, S, and a T next to them. And if a standard has an L, S, and a T, that's a priority standard. Priority standards, they need to be successful in life, school, and the test. Once you've chosen the priority standards, they need to be unwrapped. And we unwrap them because until we unwrap the standards, we cannot choose appropriate common formative assessments, or at least we can't ensure that they're aligned to the standards. So this is the process that we use unwrapping standards. We simply say, what are the verbs and what are the nouns? What do students need to know or need to do and apply, and what do students need to know and understand? So let's just, for the sake of this webinar, say that as we went through the standards, we identified Common Core State Standard 2GA1 as a priority standard. It had an L, S, and a T next to it. So that standard says recognize and draw shapes having specified attributes such as a given number of angles or a given number of equal faces. Identify triangles, quadrilaterals, pentagons, hexagons, and cubes. So when we unwrap the standard, this is the way we'll do it. We recognize as the verb, and what are the kids going to recognize? Shapes with specific attributes. And then what else are they going to do? They're going to draw. What are they going to draw? Shapes with specific attributes. And then they're going to identify. And what will they identify? Triangles, quadrilaterals, pentagons, hexagons, and cubes. That's the standard. Now, when it's time to choose common formative assessments, we can certainly choose and design assessments around those. We might also choose some additional strategies as we work in our data teams. For instance, for this webinar, chose these math process strategies. MP5, use appropriate tools strategically. MP6, attend to precision. MP7, look for and make use of structure. So why do we go through this process? I'm busy enough. Why do all this? We do this because we want the common formative assessment that will be used in data teams to be aligned to the priority standard. Many times we teach a lesson, we give an assessment, but when we really look at that assessment, it wasn't really aligned really well to the standard. So we're not testing what the standard is asking students to be able to be proficient in. So here's a video that will help you understand the process. It's pretty intense, but we will have time in the future to really delve into this process more. So the first step in the data team process is collecting and charting the data. So in this chart, what you'll see is hypothetically 4 different teachers, each with 25 students in their class. when they administered the first common formative assessments. Teresa, for example, had 2 students proficient, which was 8% of her class. 23 students were not proficient, but 15 of her students were very close. Of those 23, 5 more were likely to be proficient after instruction, and 3 of her students really needed intense intervention. And what you'll see there in that final column on the right is that not only are we looking for the number of students who really need intense intervention, but we're also putting their names in there. There's a reason for that, because we need to make sure that we know every one of our students by name, strength, and need. Same thing with Heather, and I don't need to go through the whole thing, but what you'll see here at the end, the total, 5% are currently proficient. 95 students are not proficient, but 56 are close, 31 are likely after instruction, and 8 need the intervention. So if we add the 56 who are close, together with the 31 who are likely after instruction, we get 87, right? And if we add the 87 to the 5 students who are already proficient, we now will be able to figure out what our target should be. So after we do that, we then look at step 2, which is analyzing the data to prioritize the needs. So here are the strengths, and here are the obstacles. And what we looked at here is, some of the kids couldn't get this common formative because their academic vocabulary is deficient. For our ELL kids, they don't even know the Tier 1 words. And for our non-ELLs, Tier 2 and Tier 3 words were tough. So step 3, how do we write a SMART goal, and what is a SMART goal? Well, a SMART goal is a goal that is strategic, measurable, accessible, results-bound, and time-bound. So what we're saying here is that the percentage of second grade students scoring proficient in this particular standard will increase from 5% to 92. How did we get 92? And how do we know that 92, doesn't that seem like a huge jump in just a couple of weeks? It does, except we know it's backed up by data. Because if you remember, when we added the 56 and the 31, we got 87. And we add 87 to the 5 who are already proficient, we get 92. And that's how the SMART goal is written. In step 4, this is how we're going to target our instruction. It's laser target on instruction and learning. So the strategy in this particular environment is we're going to do vocabulary practice with thinking maps during homework, weekly using paper, pencil, and what will the assignment be to create one of 8 thinking maps for each Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. Again, you can see that we have more than one strategy, but you can see how very, very specific the assignments are and the strategies are. We're looking at specific things that we know will help our students with the areas of need. Now you might say, well, what about those kids who were really low? Yeah, we can't forget them. So what will we do with them? In this model, what we would do with them is give them tutorials, break them up in groups, have them work in peer tutors. We might even want to take those 5 kids who were already proficient and have them write the tutorials, because you remember the most when you teach it. So if we have those 5 kids who are already proficient writing the tutorials for the kids who are not, so that they can work on that in a separate setting where they have additional time and support, you're also helping your kids who are proficient to reach higher goals. Step 5 is to determine the results indicators. And this is, again, also very targeted. What will the students do? What will the teachers do? So what we want to make sure is that accountability is there for everybody, but everybody knows what their task is going to be, and everybody will be able to be successful because we want it to be achievable. I have provided some common formative assessments that are aligned to this standard. Now, what you'll see, and these are provided as attachments here, so what you'll see here is that assessment 1, at the top of the assessment, you will see the standard. And at the bottom of the assessment, you will see the rubric or the criteria. And we put that on each of our assessments so that kids get used to seeing it and that they will be able to say, oh, this is what I'm learning today, and here's the performance level. So I know what I need to do in order to be proficient. What you'll see with these 4 assessments is that they're all aligned to that same standard, but each assessment goes a little deeper than the previous assessment. So once again, we're looking at depth, not width. So with common formative, or with a common core, what we're looking at is to make sure kids understand the process in math, not that we cover material. So we can't move on from this standard to the next priority standard or standards until we know that all of our kids have mastered this standard. So take a look at those assessments when you have some time. And that's it for now. Thank you.